Hey, good evening. It's Stereo Police, and I've got a topic for you this evening. Well, it's evening for me, at least. Could be any time for you, I suppose. And I want to talk about a dirty little secret of hi-fi, and I guess it's not really a secret, but it's something seldom talked about, seldom, if ever, discussed. And I want you to think about speakers and think about speaker reviews and even think about speaker specifications. When you go to a manufacturer and you look at the specs. What are the things they talk about? Frequency response, sound pressure level, impedance, things like that. And when you think about other audio components, amplifiers, DACs, preamplifiers, almost all of the other audio components that we think about, there's a specification that almost everyone pays attention to called harmonic distortion or total harmonic distortion. And it's almost always spec'd out by the manufacturer, and it's almost always measured by reviewers and discussed by reviewers, sometimes in detail. However, have you ever wondered why total harmonic distortion is not measured by reviewers, discussed by reviewers, or even spec'd out by manufacturers of loudspeakers? Well, there are. I really don't know the answer to that. I can only speculate, and so what I hope to provide you here tonight is food for thought. But I will tell you this. When you think about other components, let's take, for example, amplifiers or DACs. We're often, very focused on harmonic distortions in the range of 0.0001. Sometimes with tube amplifiers, you might get 0.1% or 0.01%, a little more. Some really fantastic components, like the benchmark DAC and benchmark amplifiers, you might get down to something really low. Sometimes you hear reviewers say, oh, it's immeasurable. My equipment can't handle it. You can't go that low. Well, how about loudspeakers? Let's take a look. I'm going to come back to this and give you some conclusions. But let's talk about what total harmonic distortion, what is it in the speaker world? Well, the output of a speaker certainly is the weak link of our audio chain in terms of their abilities to faithfully reproduce sound. And that's one of the reasons why speakers sound so different from each other. They're so vastly different from one another, whereas amplifiers, good amplifiers sound pretty close to each other. Good ones. So harmonic distortion is a measure of how much a speaker's output. It's the same for any component. Deviates from the input signal as a result of nonlinearities in the system. And those nonlinearities are created by electrical factors in the speaker and mechanical factors. And some of those factors have to do with the voice coil and the voice coil non-symmetric movement. There are electrical factors and mechanical factors there. They have to do with the suspension, the gap in the voice coil, non-rigid pistonic movement of the cone. That's a big one right there. And the diaphragm not moving coherently. And then compression problems with the air in front of the cone. I think these things right here are sort of a lesser factor than these down here. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not a pro in this area, but I suspect. Now, and by the way, the sources, I'm giving you sources here. This is for educational purposes. I'm hoping I'm complying with fair use. And this is an excellent website right here. I certainly encourage you to visit this website if you're interested in this subject. So what's a good number for a loudspeaker for total harmonic distortion? 1%. 1% is a good speaker. You say, what's a good number for an amplifier? 0.0001? Well, what's a good number for a loudspeaker? 1%. That's a good loudspeaker. And before I get in, I'm going to show you some actual measurements from speakers. Some of this might blow your mind, but do you ever wonder why we're so busy concerning ourselves with our upstream equipment, concerning ourselves with specifications and distortion and trying to, always improve our upstream equipment when our speakers are the weak link in the chain? It's kind of like, to use an analogy, it's kind of like, I'm starting out with my little 200 horsepower car, and I'm throwing gobs of money at it and improving it, and I finally get it up to 800 horsepower. But yet I'm still running it on bicycle tires. All right. Let's take a look at some measurements of an actual speaker. This is a Cali Audio. I'm not familiar with the speaker. It really doesn't matter. And what I'm showing you is total harmonic distortion measurements of the speaker. I'm not going to sit here and get into exactly how the measurements are taken or the meaning of all this stuff, but I just want to show you this graph right here. And rather than go into what a decibel to percentage is, you can figure it out for yourself. I've given you this handy little conversion over here, and this conversion chart. Oh gosh, I didn't give you a source for it. I'm so sorry. I thought I gave you a source for it. I'll have to come back and fill that in. I'll put it in the materials. But we can convert this decibel scale over here to a percentage. So we simply count the number of decibels down and convert that over to a percentage. All right. So I've done that over here between these two lines. So if you go from this line here to that line here, that's okay. And this is a fundamental. This is what we input to the speaker. And then these little things down here are the harmonics. And this will be the distortion, basically. The fundamental is the signal. That's what we want. These things down here are the things we don't want, the distortion. All right? So everything between these two lines, for example, this point here, from here to there would be about, and we're doing this across the frequency scale, so you can see the distortion of a speaker changes relative to frequency. It also changes relative to the sound pressure level too. I'm going to demonstrate that in a minute, but it changes relative to frequency. And so, for example, if I were to pick something at this particular frequency, whatever it is, 400 hertz, something like that, we get about 1% distortion, and as we get higher in frequency, the distortion, is less than 1%. But as we get down into the bass frequencies, we have more than 1%. So for example, let me just count this off. Okay, so if this is roughly 60 dBs, and we're counting down to 40 dBs right here, so that's a 20 dB difference. We go over here and we see that's 10% harmonic distortion. 10% harmonic distortion. All right. Now I'm looking at the total harmonic distortion, and you can look at these little color guys are the second harmonic and third harmonic. But at any rate, I'm not trying to get into details. I'm trying to demonstrate a broader picture here. 10%. So this demonstrates that, wow, that's a lot of harmonic distortion, and there's more harmonic distortion in the bass regions than there is in the treble regions. And there's a reason for that. That woofer's got to move through large excursions and move a lot of air. It's going to be subjective to a lot more distortion. But the point being is, speakers are not very good at faithfully reproducing sound. Yet you're busy concerning yourself with amplifiers, distinguishing between 0.0002 and 0.00002. Does that make any sense? Let's look at another one. Okay. Actually, you know what? I want to demonstrate one other point. Okay, this is kind of a challenging graph to look at. So this same website shows us something called characteristic harmonic distortion. And I won't get, it's basically total harmonic distortion divided by the mean of, I won't get into it. But this gives you a nice picture of percentage over here. All right, so we can actually look at the percentages. Here's 50 hertz. And see, we're up to 1.5% and 1%. Now, this is done at 85 dB. This is a very low level, listening level. All right, 1.5%, and see, this is 50 hertz. And here we are up here at 50 hertz. Okay, so 1.5%, we kind of go dip down, we get to 1.5%. We get up into the trebles, we're down to like, less than 0.5%, but we still don't get down anywhere near the levels of like an amp, anything like that. Now let's go up higher in SPL, from 85 to a higher level, listening level. Let's go to 95, that's pretty high. We've cranked the volume up, or we have a transient in the music. Look what happens to the THD. We're now at between 5 and 6% in the bass. At 200 hertz, we're between 3 and 4%. And even in the treble, we start rising up into the 1%, 0.5% range. So THD is, the point being, is pretty bad in the bass regions, and also THD rises with increasing volume levels, or SPLs. All right. Let's look at a different speaker. I pulled this from this website right here. This is a KEF LS50. Should be an excellent speaker. That's why I pulled it. Excellent, excellent. Great reviews, neutral. Gets some of the best reviews of speakers I've ever seen. Well, everything between here and here is 1%. So we get down in the bass frequencies. Look, down here between 50 and 100, 70 or 80, we're down to 10%. Down in the 10% area. Still can't control that bass very well. Between here and here, we're into the 1%, but we get into the treble. Let me see if I can run this number for you, okay? These are increments of 10 dB, so we'll 10, 20, 30, 40. That's down nearly 50 dB, so we can come over to 54. So that's 0.2%. Well, that would 0.2% would suck if it was a transistor amp, wouldn't it? It still ain't that good relative to amps and DACs. And this is considered one of the best. Let's look at this other speaker, some kind of a Samson Rubicon 5A. I have no idea what that is, but I just pulled it for demonstrative purpose because it gets horrendous in the bass. Everything between here and here is 1%. And so we're in the 1% range throughout the treble, but look what happens in the bass. Got 10% here, and down here between 20 and 30, we're at 20% THD. So what to do about it? Well, look, nothing. Listen to your speakers. You like them, you don't like them. But when you're picking out amps and preamps and CD and DACs and CD players and all that, uh, don't pay too much attention to the THD if it's down in 0.001, 0.000, whatever range. I'm not so sure that's going to make a whole hell of a lot of difference. Don't get too caught up in specs. Don't get too caught up in that many specifications whatsoever. Modern electronics are pretty doggone good. You're going to have to pay more attention to your ears than the specs. So this is the last slide I have for you. So one of the things I'll say is, and this is a Klipsch Cornwall II, my preference. I don't like the 3. One of the things, and one of the advantages, there are different driver technologies. And one of the things, one of the advantages that compression drivers coupled to horns have is they produce lower distortion at high SPLs and during transients. They have an advantage in that respect. I'm going to leave it. You can do the research yourself or go back to one of my previous videos where I talked about horns. Also, Klipsch uses for the woofer a very large, I think it's a 15-inch, very large cone. And large cones, low excursion cones, will inherently produce less distortion, because we get back into the issue of non-rigid pistonic motion and the diaphragm not moving coherently. Well, non-rigid pistonic motion. Think about this. I know we all like to see, our little woofers moving in and out real fast. It's really cool to see that little vibration. A lot of people like that. But when you're seeing that, you're seeing distortion, or you're seeing the cause of distortion. What you'd like to see is when you're hearing deep bass, you don't want to see that cone moving at all. Because large excursions, when you're seeing that cone, and it's moving a lot, that's producing nonlinearities. And because that suspension's got to really move, and you're also going to get cone breakup and other things that I won't get into. And it's working its tail off. It's like a little 4-cylinder engine with a turbo that's got to, work its tail off to do the same job of a V8 that barely has to do anything. Whereas a large, so this little cone has got to move that far to produce, let's say 95 dBs, Whereas this cone here, for example, the Klipsch, with its little accordion surround, you won't even see it move to produce that same 95, because the surface area of that cone is so much larger than the surface area of this cone to move the same volume of air. All right, food for thought. If I'm incorrect about something, please let me know. Or if I need to be filled in on something, let me know. I wanted to make this quick and not so detailed. I love respectfully learning from respectful people. Thank you, Stereo Police. Food for thought.